I call the member for Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. On the 18th of October 2001, an Indonesian fishing boat left the port of Bandar Lampung. There were 421 people on board, including at least 70 children. The boat was just 20 metres long and 4 metres wide, so people were tightly packed on board. The next day, about 70 kilometres south of Indonesia, the boat encountered heavy seas, took on water, listed violently to the side, capsized and sank within an hour. There were life jackets on board, but none of them worked. As the Senate committee chaired by the late, great Senator Peter Cook concluded, there were at least 70 children on board. Only 3 survived. 200 men and women lost their lives as well. As the International Organisation for Migration pointed out, the tragedy was due to, quote, the way the people smugglers pack these boats. 9 years later, on the 15th of December 2010, a boat carrying around 90 asylum seekers sank off the coast of Christmas Island. 30 bodies were recovered, including those of 4 juveniles and 4 infants. Up to 20 others are missing, presumed dead. The report of the Joint Select Committee of the Christmas Island tragedy quoted Raymond Murray, the first person to arrive at the scene. He told the committee, "Standing right out on the edge of the rocks, there were times when the boat was closer than you are to me now. I will never forget seeing a woman holding up a baby, obviously wanting me to take it, and not being able to do anything. It was just a feeling of absolute hopelessness. It was like it was happening in slow motion. A wave would pick the boat up and then almost hit the rocks and then go back again. And then finally, it was like it exploded." Over the past decade, there have been 414 confirmed drownings by asylum seekers at sea. Apart from those I've mentioned, 5 were drowned on the 16th of April 2009, 12 on the 1st of November 2009, 12 on the 15th of June 2010. Apart from this, there's over 500 more unconfirmed deaths by asylum seekers at sea. There were reports of a vessel carrying 200 people that disappeared entirely in March 2000. There's reports of another vessel with 100 people that disappeared, presumably with the loss of everyone on board, in October 2009. Deputy Speaker, we'll never know how many asylum seekers have died at sea attempting to reach Australia. But we do know that those people certainly number in their hundreds and perhaps in their thousands. Quite often the asylum seeker debate focuses on people who arrive by boat, but that's only a portion of the refugees we take. We also take refugees from offshore processing, refugees who have, in many cases, spent years in refugee camps. And the more onshore arrivals we take, the fewer offshore arrivals we take. To provide a more complete picture, I want to say something about the refugees that are resettled from these offshore camps. The Department of Immigration and Citizenship has a vast network of officers which work in cooperation with the UNHCR to process refugees. Our officers include those in Amman, Beijing, Cairo, Moscow and Warsaw. We work with the UNHCR that recommends or refers refugees for resettlement to the Australian Government. Once you've been recognised as a refugee by the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, the person is referred to the Department of Immigration and Citizenship for resettlement. Australia is unusual in this. We're one of only about 20 nations worldwide that participate formally in the UNHCR's resettlement program and accept quotas of refugees on an annual basis. The last year, for which I was able to get statistics, Australia had the 3rd largest number of refugees for resettlement under this UNHCR program. We were outranked by the United States and by Canada, but on a per capita basis, we actually take more UNHCR refugees than either of those two countries. Of course, the numbers that we take are small. 13,750 in past years, increasing now to 14,750 under this agreement. But that's a small share of the world's 15 million refugees. 10.5 million of whom are under the UNHCR's mandate. The world as a whole needs to do more to take in refugees under the UNHCR. Last year, there are only 539,170 refugees recognised or resettled under the UNHCR. Of these, only 98,761 were resettled from other countries. What we need is a regional approach, and this approach began through the Bali meeting in March, bringing together countries in our region to discuss how to deal with the challenge of refugees. Labor's approach has always been one of multilateralism. That's true in immigration, as it is in trade, as it is in foreign policy. The Coalition, on the other hand, have a tendency to focus on unilateralism, striking particular deals with single countries. They did it in trade, they do it in migration, and we believe that it is the wrong approach. Labor's approach, modern Labor's approach, will always be a multilateralist one. I'm very proud of modern Labor's multilateralist approach on refugees, but it is important to also acknowledge my party's own history, and that history has not always been a great one. We were a party formed to protect the rights of Australian workers, and partly for the reason that we were formed to protect the rights of Australian workers, there were Labor representatives in this place who played a frankly shameful role in restricting the intake of Jewish refugees fleeing persecution in Europe in the 1930s. They did so from a mix of anti-Semitism and anti-capitalist radicalism. And this confusion between Jewishness and capitalist banking meant that Australia took only 5,000 Jewish refugees before the outbreak of war. Labor Senator John Armstrong in 1938 said, "I urge the government to take steps to prevent the unrestricted immigration of Jews to this country." Labor Immigration Minister Arthur Calwell was himself shocked when the High Court ruled that he could not deport an Indonesian woman who had 6 children with her Australian husband. Calwell thought it was right that the family be torn apart. But Labor's role is fundamentally a proud one. In 1945, at the San Francisco Conference to establish the United Nations, Jessie Street, the only woman on the Australian delegation, argued for the removal of restrictions on Jewish migration, for an increased intake of Jewish refugees to Australia. In 1948, as the 4th President of the UN General Assembly, H.V. Doc Evatt was a key drafter of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that says in Article 14, paragraph 1, that, quote, "Everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution." That set the foundation for the 1951 Refugee Convention, originally to address the problem of the millions of Europeans displaced by World War II, then updated in 1967 to apply to refugees generally. And today the issue of immigration is a proud Labor issue. In my first speech I mentioned my mother's parents, a boilermaker and a teacher, who lived by the credo that if there was a spare room in the house, it should be used by someone who needed the space. And I remember as a little kid eating in my grandparents' home with new migrants from Hong Kong, Papua New Guinea, Chile, Cambodia and Sri Lanka. Last year I attended a prize-giving ceremony for an art competition run as part of Refugee Week. First prize went to a Karen Burmese woman who'd woven a traditional crimson tunic. Because she didn't have a proper loom, the woman had taken the mattress off her bed and fashioned a loom from her pine bed base. It's hard not to be overwhelmed by the courage and spirit of Australia's migrants. In referring to refugees in my first speech, I wasn't unusual. If there's a defining characteristic about first speeches by Labor members, it's that they almost invariably include a migrant's tale. Part of what we're doing with the agreement with Malaysia is trying to ensure better treatment for refugees currently in Malaysia. The challenging protection environment in Malaysia makes it difficult for the UNHCR to fulfil its mandate in the country. UNHCR registers asylum seekers, determines their status claims and provides them with documentation, and our agreement will allow the UNHCR access to persons seeking asylum, including assessing their need for protection. It strengthens the relationship between the UNHCR and Malaysian authorities, not just for those refugees who come from the Malaysian camps to Australia, but for the nearly 100,000 refugees who are in those camps. The UNHCR in Malaysia aims to recognise refugees and process claims, and Australia is helping the UNHCR to achieve those aims. In their words, the words of the UNHCR, quoted as the UNHCR's understanding that the arrangement will, with time, deliver further protection dividends in the two countries, as well as in the region. Lasting improvements in the region's response to asylum seekers and refugees necessarily involve countries like Malaysia that are not yet parties to the Convention. The arrangement with Malaysia is subject to oversight by committees involving representatives of the Australian Government, the Malaysian Government, the UNHCR and the International Organisation for Migration. We have to get policy right in this area, and there's no simple solutions. As the old Max Weber line goes, public policy is like slow boring through hard boards, and nowhere is this more true than with migration. As Mark Dreyfus, the Parliamentary Secretary Mark Dreyfus has pointed out, this isn't about being compassionate, it's about competing compassions. There's no moral high ground. I reject in this debate attacks on public servants in the Department of Immigration and Citizenship, such as those we've seen in recent weeks. Public servants who have a difficult task, and we should respect the long hours they put into crafting policy. I respect the many constituents of mine who work in the Australian Public Service, and I will defend their impartiality. Deputy Speaker, I would also reject the claim that some have made that this is a new Pacific solution. There's two reasons this is wrong. Firstly, the Howard government's Pacific solution saw no increase in the total refugee intake. Under this policy, we're taking an additional 1,000 refugees per year. And the second reason is that the Pacific solution had no involvement for the UN High Commission for Refugees. Ours has a strong involvement from that body. Deputy Speaker, as a Labor Member of Parliament, I always believe that the neediest people should be given the first priority. At our offshore processing centres in Africa, Asia and the Middle East, working with the UNHCR, we take people who have nothing. Those who come in by boat are invariably those who have enough money to pay a people smuggler. In saying this, I'm not reflecting on those who come by boat. In their shoes, I might well make the same decision. But we have a fixed total quota, 13,750 now, 14,750 with the new increase. And so I believe it is appropriate to prioritise those who are selected with the UNHCR in our offshore processing centres. Deputy Speaker, this is a hard debate, and I've received many emails, had many conversations with people in my electorate about what is the right thing to do. I respect those who disagree with what the government's position is on this, but no one has a monopoly on compassion. In closing, Deputy Speaker, I'd pay tribute to those in the ACT who work with refugees, as my maternal grandparents did with refugees in their home. I want to acknowledge the work of the Multicultural Youth Service in settling young refugees, often those with, who are orphaned or who only have one parent. The work they do to bring newly arrived migrants into Canberra to help them develop friends and social networks is valuable work indeed. I recognise Companion House, which works with the victims of torture and trauma. It is hard work and it is important work. They provide health care and they work to provide social networks. I'd like to acknowledge those who work in these organisations and the many other organisations that assist refugees in the ACT. Your compassion is a great credit to you, and it is one of the reasons why I hope that in the future Australia will be able to take still more refugees than we do today.